I watched it and I'm sulking about it.
I mean, I've just got a horrible worry of like the like Guardian columnist novel that is going to come from the England Euros win in the same summer as the Keir Starmer victory. I feel like
I can't see him beating Spain, because Spain are like the only team that have been consistently good in every single game, and they've beaten better teams than England already. But England have been shit and they're in the finals. So.
Yeah, it's just
come on.
I think Southgate might Keir Starmer it and just sort of like fail into the best possible position. And I'm terrified. I want England to win.
By everyone in front of him collapsing at his feet, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, obviously, I want England to win, but I don't want the fucking Jonathan Friedland column that's going to come from.
I'm sorry, you can't have the glory without the English media. Like you can't turn them off for a week, unfortunately.
Thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory. I don't know. How's it going? I already said that. Everyone good? Everyone chilling?
Yeah.
I'm
ready
great.
Yeah, I'm very underprepared, but I do have one, like, the ace up my sleeve is like that we could like read Robert Peston's analysis of the the election at some point. Because it was like really I don't know shit about French politics, but I can tell when some guy who also doesn't know shit about something is bullshitting his way through the topic, you know.
I mean, how long has Peston had this sort of job, and he's never bothered really to learn about English politics or British politics? Like,
exactly.
English language.
So I thought that could be cathartic to go through that. That could be a bit of fun. But first, we could just, I don't know, me and Geraint can pick your brains for a bit about what is France, what means France, what's a France.
Sounds good.
Cool.
I paused there because I thought Marlon was going to say something, but then he didn't. And...
No, I mean, well, France, officially the French Republic, is a country located primarily in Western Europe. It also includes these regions and territories in the Americas and the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, giving it one of the largest discontiguous economic zones in the world. I can continue getting into this if you guys want to get into the weeds, but
please, let's have the whole Wikipedia page.
Metropolitan France shares borders with Belgium and northeast.
This is like, was it Andy Kaufman used to like do one-man shows where he'd like read all of The Great Gatsby, and it would take him like 24 hours to get through the whole thing, but he did like a perseverance test.
I love Andy Kaufman like as a teenager, which was a bad combination.
Yeah, he's very like obnoxious type of comedy. Yeah, I mostly know the broad strokes of him, aka like what's depicted in the film Man on the Moon, starring Jim Carrey, featuring the song Man on the Moon by R.E.M. Well, it wasn't written for it, I think.
Lost in the Funhouse by Bill Zemi. I love Andy Kaufman. Look at that.
Oh,
this is actually a really good book. It's like really well written. It's written in this second person point of like in the present tense, and it's a really weird, interesting biography.
Oh, cool.
I highly recommend it.
Well, I wasn't trying to dismiss him by saying his comedy is obnoxious. It's a very confrontational style.
he's goading the audience a lot of the time. But
that's
he's
the
good
point.
at it. Hugely influential. Doing so as well.
He was a wrestler, Geraint, so I imagine you're a fan as well.
Yeah, specifically because the guy he was feuding with is probably a paedophile. So yeah, brilliant.
He was feuding with an actual wrestler.
Well, Jerry Lawler, who he did the stuff with, he's allegedly he had charges against him that got dropped under slightly mysterious circumstances, and then he spent 20 years bragging on air about how he fancies school kids and stuff, like upper end school kids, probably technically illegal, but he's a creep anyway. It's just what level.
I'm sure that was just his style of comedy. It was all.
It partly was, but there was like actual real allegations against him.
To clarify, I don't actually know who we're talking about. I was defending him out of an ironic disposition, not because
I got it.
Okay.
It was similar to what I said about Kaufman. I got where you were coming from with that.
Well, Jerry Lawler. Anyway, if you want to know more, if you're interested in all this, you should buy Bill Zemi's book, Lost in the Funhouse: The Life and Mind of Andy Kaufman. It's published by Delacorte Press, and I highly recommend it.
Got
Oh, it looks like a good
Lawler,
reason.
Seinfeld. They need to put a halt on people called Jerry getting famous until we can figure out what's
Jerry,
going on.
Jerry Lawler is
kids alone.
Jerry Lawler is the wrestler, not the comedian. Anyway, I don't know how we got here, to be honest.
I think he did stuff with Kaufman. I think he was saying.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, let's get off there. It was just a tangent that went too far. I'm sorry I'm late as well. Like, I've really taken the old adage, like, he'll be late to his own funeral to heart, and I'm hoping that I can stave off death if I'm late for enough things.
Well, I mean, you've got hours of podcast recording behind you, so you can live the sort of Woody Allen dream of the Woody Allen dream is I don't want to be immortal.
Woody Allen dream.
No, he says I don't want to be immortalized through my work. I want to be immortalized by never dying. And it's coincidentally another paedophile. Oh, is he?
It's like, yeah, I don't want to hear about his fucking dreams, man.
just no one played a finished episode to Hadley Freeman will be fine.
Yeah, I was gonna say Woody Allen's gonna live forever, not by never dying, but by having Hadley Freeman write an eternal column in his defense.
Yeah, immortalized in the words of Hadley Freeman. That's the dream, man.
Or those two Twitter accounts where if you make any jokes about Woody Allen, they just pop up out of nowhere. They must search for it like several times a day, and they're just like, "No, he's innocent. How dare you?"
Oh, Hadley sock puppets.
Yeah,
I think one of them's like an actual like Dutch professor or something that like posts under a real name.
Great. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to Real Politik Anglo-French Elections Summit 2024. We don't have any actual French people with us here today. Feel free to correct me if either of you guys actually are in some way French. But Marlon's pointing to himself to indicate.
I am legally French. Yeah, I have
legally French
citizenship. Yeah.
And Olly, just an interloper into French politics.
Yeah, I lived there for a bit, and I lived there when everything started kicking off. So I've been paying attention since.
Excellent. Well, as Paul Mason once said, it's kicking off everywhere, but especially in France. So I should actually properly introduce our guests. We have Marlon J, Ettinger, and Olly Haynes of the FLEP, French Legislative Elections podcast. Is that all present and correct, guys?
It was present and correct a couple of days ago. Now it's FLAP 24, the French Legislative Assembly podcast for 2024, because the election's over.
It's still a winning acronym, I think. Well, here we are talking about politics today. I've been obviously pretty preoccupied with recent events in British politics, but it was like legitimately exciting a couple of days later where with just this myopic focus on our own shores I guess I've been thinking a bit about like Biden's cognitive decline. That's hard to escape at the moment, but just with this singular British focus, and then all of a sudden the left are doing stuff in this country just across the sea, and they've just surprised even the expectations of our two journalists who are today our two journalists we've got here today who are themselves pretty sympathetic to the left. Is that right, guys?
We're sort of a moderate down the line podcast. We're a centrist podcast, though I do have some sympathies with Mélenchon. And to get serious for a second, I was convinced going into this election that Marine Le Pen and Rassemblement National, the far right parties, were going to win. That's what it looked like. That's what all the polls were saying. I was spending a lot of time talking to people within the party, trying to get all, sourced up and talking to all these people. They were very confident that they were going to win. I was talking with people about who the cabinet was going to be and stuff, and what they saw themselves implementing in government. So when the results came in on Sunday night, that they in fact were the third party in the country instead of the first one, not even the first one without a majority, but the third one with nothing close to majority, let alone governing. Yeah, it was a big surprise. And we talked a lot on FLEP 24, the French Legislative Elections podcast for 2024, the best source for news about French politics and elections. We talked a lot on that podcast about how just basically with this scenario in mind, we went into the election thinking the next step was going to be a Rassemblement National government. It was a relief. I talked with this other journalist all the time, and I'm already plugging Mark Endewall, but he's the best investigative journalist in France. And we were talking, after, and it was like, yeah, he said, what a relief, what a joy. It was in this like sort of funny poetic language, but it was a big relief, and it was sort of a joy to see the left do that strangest of things, which is win.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I was in the headquarters. Well, actually, it was in the pub. I was in the basement of this pub because I was in France for the first round, but not for the second. I was in the basement of this pub in London where the entire London French left, which is like actually quite considerable in size, because London is the site of the Northern Europe constituency for overseas voters. So like expats have their own MPs in France, and everyone, like, there was just this sort of dead silence in the room as the exit poll was coming in. Completely palpable tension. And then suddenly just everyone burst into cheering, people screaming, "On a gagné, we have won," and then singing the Marseillaise. It was a very like ecstatic moment, particularly because it was completely unexpected. It was like, the situation is not the same, but what it reminded me of in terms of like that initial feeling was like 2017 here. It's not the same.
We had a mini version of that on Thursday as well, when Corbyn just won in his own constituency. That was like, I was saying to you guys earlier how I'm not into football, but when that happened, it was like the only time that I get like Geraint does when Plymouth Argyle or Wales United scores a goal. See, I can't even get a sentence out properly about football. But yeah, no, I can totally imagine the reaction. Although I have to say, like, I invited you on this show under false pretenses, Ollie. I thought that you were, on your part, you've deceived me. I thought that you were in France for the election. You went to the Left's victory party in France. You were there in the square where they used to have the very active guillotine. And I'm sorry, but I think we might have to end this prestigious interview.
I'll be there again in a week's time if that helps. We can cut around my absence of being in France.
We recorded one of the episodes together in Paris in a park.
That's cool. Well, don't worry, it's forgiven. We can move past this. It's water under the bridge. But yeah, like, it certainly like took me back, because all I'd heard was just like far right on course for like this massive victory. And then didn't they do because obviously they do it by rounds in France. Didn't they do quite well in the first round still? Or was it still lower than people expected?
No, in the first round they did sort of as expected, which was get on course. In fact, they did as expected, and then it was slightly revised down after the initial projection. So once the figures from the Interior Ministry came in, the far right bloc, which is an alliance of the Rassemblement National, Eric Zemmour, who is like French Douglas Murray, has his own party.
Oh, God.
Marshall said you disagree with my characterization that he's French Douglas Murray?
No, he just wasn't in the alliance.
No. But my point is, his voters ended up corralling into the alliance. He wasn't in the alliance. His candidate stood against the RN, but they got like a pitiful percentage of the vote. Their voters corralled into this right-wing alliance. And the centre-right party, Les Républicains, led by this guy, Eric Ciotti. It was predicted that they got 34% of the vote. They actually got about 30% of the vote. The left got 28 in the first round, and the centrist coalition got 23 or 24. And so that's like, first round is what you judge the actual size of each block on, basically, because first round people vote for what they want to vote for. In the second round, they vote against what they don't want.
That's a shit result for Macron in the first round, then.
Yeah, very bad, yeah.
And he was looking at like winning 50 seats, and he was at 250 before. After the first round, his party, they're like, they're going to win 50 seats.
Yeah.
But he would have got a boost in the second round because of tactical voting from supporters of parties to his left.
Pretty much, yeah. So this is how Macron has won power every time, basically, because, and you were saying how you only really heard about the far right. That's not an accident, I don't think. And I think British media is as complicit in this, to be honest, because British media, unsurprisingly, is quite hostile to Mélenchon, because Mélenchon is such a prominent figure on the French left. There is this like collective decision in French politics to pretend that he's not there a lot of the time, or if you're going to talk about him, to attack him. And that extends into British media as well, I think. The Guardian, I mean, I write for The Guardian sometimes. I know a lot of people at The Guardian. I like a lot of people at The Guardian. But I think they have been pretty disgusting in some of their coverage of this election, because whenever the left is mentioned, it's either an article praising Glucksmann, which is fine. You can praise Glucksmann if you like. Like, I don't agree with him, but whatever.
Who's Glucksmann?
Glucksmann is this
people like me.
Yeah, he's this like centre-left figure who ran against Mélenchon's party in the European elections. And he came out first in the European elections because his electorate is very centrist, centre-leftist, and disaffected Macronists. So in the British press, you'll get praise for him, which is whatever, you know, they can praise him if they like. But then you'll get articles about Mélenchon being this rabid anti-Semite with no evidence and stuff like that.
Well,
so that's the British press' favourite thing to do.
They've warmed up for that for quite a number of years. They're in permanent attack mode, ready to go.
Yeah, and they have been against Mélenchon. Marlon read out on the pod a piece from the New European, which was just terrible.
Fucking hell. That's like the shittest paper. It's just like a vanity paper for like, wow.
It's honestly disgusting. If I was like, I didn't have the time, but I really think that article should have been like reported to an ethics board or a professional board. That the reporting was asinine. They were saying
what did it say?
So for instance, so right after the first round of the election, when there was this big score for the RN, I was just looking through my papers because I was trying to find a graphic, but basically I didn't find it, but basically it was everywhere in France except for Paris and the area around Paris, Ile-de-France, was a wave of blue, which is what they labeled the RN.
Yeah.
Now, the results are different. I know people aren't going to be able to see this, but you guys can see it. This was the end result. So brown is RN. It was very different. And a big reason for that is because Jean-Luc Mélenchon, immediately went on television or gave a speech and he said, any election where there are third place finishers that have qualified for the second round, and you can qualify for the second round by getting at least 12.5% of registered voters. So it's like, it depends how many registered voters there are in place, but 12.5% of that, whatever, you can more than two parties can qualify for the second round. And Mélenchon said, in any places where the Rassemblement National has come in first, a new Popular Front candidate has come in third, which would mean another candidate comes in second, whether that's Macron's party, whether that's Les Républicains, the flank of that party that wasn't allied with RN, or anyone else, we will stand down and call for votes for the second place finisher to block the RN candidate from being elected. And of course, he called for reciprocity, that the same agreement should be respected in places where RN came in first and a new Popular Front candidate came in second, and there's a third place finisher. In this article by what's her name, Kate Simmons, I think, she says,
I'm not actually familiar with that terrible British centrist columnist. I'm sorry to fail you. I have me and Geraint, one of us. Do you know her actually, Geraint?
No, I think if she's mainly at the New European, that's sort of below our notice, really. It's
not
like, it's just like the last group of people that think James Paul is worth listening to. It's not.
Yeah, I was gonna say that like the people we know at the European are the sort of people who are like they've ended up there. They've gone through maybe a bunch of more established publications, and that's where their particular brand of they're writing for like the Stop Brexit paper in 2024, that kind of centrism, that's where it's gone.
Yeah, she's based in Paris, but I think she's either Australian or English. I don't know a ton about her, but she basically wrote that the Kremlin has won this election. The Kremlin-friendly candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon, he poured oil on the fire. He barely mentioned Le Pen or Rassemblement National. He just declared victory.
Which just isn't true.
Which is factually untrue. It was the first thing he did. He called immediately for votes against Le Pen. Just immediately. And then the cherry on top was Gabriel Attal, the prime minister, came out the same day, and he made a speech calling for votes against the RN, but only in the case where the candidates running against the RN are in the Republican arc, that have the values of the Republic. And if you follow French politics, what they mean by that is not LFI, not Mélenchon. They sort of exclude Mélenchon and the left that is around him from those values of the Republic. So when Attal came out with this speech, he was excluding LFE, which is a lot of candidates. The kicker, as I said, the cherry on the top.
To me is not Labour Friends of Israel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh,
that is very confusing for the British left, I think. They'll be like, why the fuck do the French left love this horrific British Israel lobby organization so much?
For me, it's the opposite. Whenever I see Labour Friends of Israel in a British paper, I'm like, I have confusing with the France.
Yeah,
it confuses me as well.
Yeah.
Start singing the Internationale in French.
So Attal came out with this, and in this column in the New European, she said, striking a different tone was Gabriel Attal's conciliatory speech calling for a hard line against the far right. It was just like, it was factually wrong. That would not have, if I was an editor at her paper, I would never publish her article.
No, I despite that. I mean, what I found just particularly disgusting about that article, and a lot of coverage in English language media, has been the focus on Rima Hassan.
Right, there was that too. I even forgot.
Yeah, no, because that article made reference to Islamism, because Rima Hassan, she's the first Franco-Palestinian politician to achieve any elected position. She was elected during the European elections a few weeks ago as a Euro deputy, what do we call them, MEP. And part of the reason that she's been very prominent in the campaign is because a lot of LFI strongholds are like multi-racial areas and like staunchly left-wing areas that care about Palestine. But also, I think she's a very interesting woman, and obviously Palestine is like very important at the moment, so it's not surprising that she's currently quite prominent. She was flanked Mélenchon on one side wearing a keffiyeh, which lots of people were completely outraged about, and this article sort of reproduced that outrage. And I think that's disgusting. Like, Rima Hassan has come in for some of the most awful criticism and hatred over the last few months. Her phone number got leaked, and she gets like daily texts from like neo-Nazis and Zionists like telling her to like kill herself or whatever. She was something that has happened recently in French politics, which is like relatively new from what I understand, because I spoke to Rima Hassan during the European elections campaign, and she said that she felt that this was a new development in France, is the role of the Israel lobby. So during the European elections, I know that we're just sort of jumping all over the place, but like I feel like this like vibes-based approach will help people listeners there.
This is a vibes-based podcast, man.
Okay, yeah. Election campaign, there were like a series of summons by the counter-terror police in France over what's called terrorism apologia, which basically meant like being insufficiently, it was the like, do you condemn Hamas series of arrests?
Yeah.
And this included Rima Hassan, and it included Mathilde Panot, the leader of La France Insoumise in the French parliament. So like senior politicians were being summoned by police, as well as trade unionists, students, protesters. And this was because these organizations, one which is called like the French Jewish Youth Organization, I think. Yes, the French Jewish Youth Organization, and the Organisation Juive Européenne, so the European Jewish Organization, which is like essentially like a law firm that effectively runs lawfare campaigns for the Israeli state. The woman in charge of it recently met Isaac Herzog, has had several meetings with the Israeli ambassador to France, and they made basically dozens of complaints against these left-wing candidates, such that eventually the police have to like respond to them because the French terrorism prevention system is quite weird. And so it was like a means of finding like dozens and dozens of these vexatious complaints immediately after October the 7th against prominent pro-Palestine politicians, trade unionist protesters, as a means of like trying to shut down criticism of Israel in France. And Rima Hassan got one of these, very obviously targeted at her because she's the most senior Palestinian politician in France. In fact, she's the only one. Anyway, this article in the New European essentially took at face value this entire sort of campaign of smears and lawfare and just horrendous invective and anti-Palestinian racism, and like referred to it as like Mélenchon being soft on Islamism or something. It was dreadful.
Fucking hell. Yeah, well, I mean, that has like some, again, like British resonances, because somebody who campaigned for the independent candidate in Leicester, who beat John Ashworth, who was going to be a minister in Keir Starmer's government, but he lost his seat to a pro-Palestine independent. Somebody who prominently campaigned for that was, I believe, like arrested by police and then released without charge. I think this all happened today. I may be wrong, like probably in the last few days at least. And then John Ashworth went on TV and, who's now the director of shady money laundering organization Labour Together, went on TV and kind of said, this guy, he's linked to terrorism, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no one really knows the facts of the issue. And it seems a bit strange, a bit premature for a former elected politician to be like going out in the media and weighing in as if he's like judge, jury, and executioner in this case. And like the other thing is, you mentioned that article. Did you see that Jewish Chronicle headline? It was an article about Mélenchon, and it said, like, meet Mélenchon. He's like Jeremy Corbyn, but with 8 million Islamist voters. Some shit like that. Yeah, I think it just said Muslim voters, like as if that was self-evidently a bad thing.
Yeah. It was really fully mask off, even for a publication that doesn't really bother to put the mask on a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's because, I mean, I don't know. I did see the headline. I didn't read the article. But I think that might be because they're like parroting the like sort of French way of talking about this.
Yeah.
Because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Marlon, but I think anti-Muslim racism is pretty much allowed in France in like a lot of the media. Yeah.
The media is very racist against Arabs and African people and Black people. And, obviously it's ramped up a lot, this sort of campaign, because the media is defending politicians who criticize or who call out the genocide in Palestine. They don't want that to even be on the radar or to be acceptable at all, which is partially some of what you talked about with some of that lawfare. And at the same time, it's a great way to smear all these politicians in the context of election campaigns. And it played a lot into the campaign. We talked about it considerably on the podcast, not just because, obviously it's relevant what's going on in Israel right now and the genocide in Palestine, but it also became relevant in the sense that it was a constant attack line on Mélenchon. And it's an attack that's been ramping up for years to the point where now, like Attal said when he was referencing like these votes, LFI and Jean-Luc Mélenchon have become unacceptable in popular opinion, or in polite society, I should say. They're literally routinely described as anti-Semites. And let me be clear, Jean-Luc Mélenchon is not an anti-Semite. Jean-Luc Mélenchon is not an anti-Semite. Let me say it again. Jean-Luc Mélenchon is not an anti-Semite. The people in LFE are not anti-Semitic. They're humanists. A lot of them are socialists, communists. And I've never seen a hint of anti-Semitism in any time I've spent talking with any of them. Jean-Luc Mélenchon sued these guys back in 2012. This has been going on for a long time. That might not be the exact year, but it was around the 2012 presidential campaign, because they called him anti-Semitic, and he won. He won the defamation case. The type of things that they accuse Mélenchon of being anti-Semitic for are absurd. And we can give a couple examples, or I'll give you a couple examples. When Yael Braun-Pivet, the president of the National Assembly, who's a Macron MP, went to Tel Aviv.
Was a Macron MP.
Good point. Did she lose?
I'm pretty sure she lost, yeah.
Oh, wow. I missed that. There's so many people. There's so many losers these days.
I'll fact check this, but anyway, carry on.
Hard to keep up with all the losers. But she went to Tel Aviv after October 7th, when Israel started its sort of bombing, destruction campaign in Gaza, murderous campaign, and to just provide full-throated support, unconditional support for Israel and the Israeli army. And Mélenchon said, oh, there's Yael Braun-Pivet camping out in Tel Aviv, giving unconditional support to these criminals, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. But the camping part, I'm not paraphrasing, camping out. And people were saying, oh, camping out?
Sorry, just to fact check myself, she was elected this time, but it was narrow.
Nice.
Oh, gutted. West Streeting style.
Yeah. And camping out. So they were saying that he was making a reference to concentration camps. It was this complete leap in logic that made no sense. And another example, there's a deputy called Stéphane Delagout from Marseille. He's
Sebastian Delagout.
There you go. I knew I had it wrong. Thanks, Olly. Sebastian Delagout in Marseille, and he posted this fan cam, I guess, this edit right before the election. And I learned later, the first time I saw it, I wasn't aware of this, but it was a League of Legends edit, which apparently is a popular video game, which the young people play these days. And they just sort of stitched in all the faces of the candidates of the left in these characters in the game, and they were coming together fighting off the monsters, which were like Macron and Le Pen, and then another guy named Mayor Habib, who used to be the deputy for the overseas territories, including Israel. And there's a moment in the video where before the good guys come together, they show a pizza box that said Stone Oven Pizza. And this is a reference to the fact that when the New Popular Front negotiated their union, a joint candidacy, joint candidates for the election, there was like a picture of some guy bringing in a box of pizzas that they negotiated over.
I can see where this is going, by the way. I think maybe I've just got that twisted mind and I should be a centrist.
No, you're right.
Well, let's see if you do, because there is quite a twist here.
Okay.
So Mayor Habib, they focused on that because he was like this monster and saying, oh, look, so you're fighting off the tentacled Jewish, monster, even though Mayor Habib is not just a Jewish person who happens to be a deputy, he's a close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He has his company paid for Benjamin Netanyahu's family vacations. Mayor Habib poses with Netanyahu. There's no question. And also before he was elected, Netanyahu was considering him for the role of ambassador to France for Israel. So he's not just a random Jewish deputy. But they were saying, oh, well, look, you're this tentacled Jewish monster. And here's the twist. Let's see if you got this right. But they said that the pizza box, because it said Stone Oven on it, was a reference to the crematorium in Auschwitz.
Yeah, that is what I thought it was going to be, actually. I'm ashamed that I made that mental leap. But yeah, again, I think just after seeing all the stuff thrown at Jeremy Corbyn in a very similar vein, I can kind of like right centrist, anti-left, anti-Semitism smears in my sleep. Not through any great enthusiasm for them, you'll be surprised to learn. But yeah, do you think that they kind of observed how, I mean, you were actually in the UK, Marlon. Obviously, you're British anyway, Ollie, but you were in the UK for the 2019 election, weren't you? And you would have seen how very similarly, in polite society, as you say, polite liberal opinion was Jeremy Corbyn is defined by anti-Semitism. He is irreparably tarred by anti-Semitism, and to support him is to turn a blind eye to anti-Semitism, whether or not you yourself have any great antipathy towards Jewish people. And that kind of came to be through sheer force of repetition almost. And I'm wondering if you think that the French centre in particular, but also the right, who always get really excited when they see the centre doing this stuff, were watching that closely and studying that.
I'll come in here first, I think, and then Marlon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I think that's true. I think there's an element of this is a tactic that the enemies, the political adversaries of the left arrive at naturally anyway, because anti-Semitism stands in for support for US imperial interests, i.e. support for Israel, and it's the way to like delegitimize that, to accuse people of anti-Semitism falsely. Obviously, anti-Semitism is a big problem. It is a very big problem. Obviously, the way that the like sort of chain of signifiers works is that like anti-Semitism stands in for critique of US imperialism. And so there were parts of the French establishment that had arrived at this tactic anyway. But there are like definitely elements of looking across the channel at what worked to dispatch the left in Britain and see them off. I'm thinking particularly of a couple of examples. So in the 2022 legislative elections campaign, Danielle Simone, who has now actually been purged by Mélenchon over her criticisms of him, but was
Marlon made a little hand gesture. I won't say which one. It could be a Masonic handshake of some sort. I don't know. It was a metal sign. Let's be clear here.
Yeah, Simone's now been purged by Mélenchon for her criticism of him, but she remains broadly on the left. Whatever. She, in 2022, she is a MP for Seine-Saint-Denis, which is like a poor area around the edge of Paris. She got into a lot of hot water because of a particular canvasser who joined her on a campaigning expedition, and that particular canvasser's name was one Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
And this caused like a days-long scandal because people were going, isn't that guy like Britain's new Hitler? Like, isn't he the most racist person in Britain? And then also we've seen in recent weeks, particularly since Starmer's in the last couple of weeks since Starmer's victory. Has it only been how long has it been since Starmer won?
Like a week. It's been 6 days. It already seems like months, but no, it's been 6 days.
Yeah. Okay.
I can finally breathe now that he's been elected. Just
in the 6 days,
you can go to brunch.
Yeah, in the 6-day-long bottomless brunch since Starmer's been elected, we have seen repeated calls from the snaky parts of the centre left who want to keep Mélenchon's voters because Mélenchon is the most popular of the figures on the centre left. He's the one with the actual organic support base, but he does obviously turn off middle class voters. The parts of the centre left, they want to keep Mélenchon's voters but get rid of Mélenchon, have been saying, oh, you see what happens in Britain when they decorbanize their left. Il faut décorbaniser la gauche française. They're using Corbyn's name in a negative sense as a term to refer to sort of the cleansing and rendering palatable of the left. So I definitely think there's been an element of looking across the channel at this. And there's been other weird, funny... I'm surprised by the degree to which French politicians pay attention to Britain, to be honest. Because throughout this campaign, we've had Corbyn's name thrown out. We've had Truss's name thrown out. And there was someone else. Someone else was thrown out as evidence of things you shouldn't be doing. So definitely
he's popular internationally. Everyone loves Kinnock. Not me, but lots of people. The great president of the leader of the free world is a big Kinnock fan.
Yes, yeah, famously.
I see the echoes in kind of the delegitimization of both Corbyn and Mélenchon, them being placed outside of the acceptable limits of politics. My dad has very sort of centrist politics, and he said something weird to me the other day. He was like, Mélenchon doesn't believe in the Fifth Republic. And I was just like, what the fuck? He's been out there saying every day, we must defend the Fifth Republic. And, it's all just something he heard, some centrist pundit say, basically.
To be fair, to your dad, he's not wrong. But that's not for the reason that he thinks.
Okay.
Mélenchon is a long-time advocate for a Sixth Republic.
Okay.
A better Sixth Republic.
Yeah, do you want to explain this, Marlon? Because you probably know better than me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so Mélenchon does believe in ending the Fifth Republic because he thinks that the power of the president is too monarchical. He thinks that the power should be returned to parliament or even more directly to people through a series of referendums. And he's campaigned since 2012, when he first ran for president, on a constituent assembly after being elected, where a new constitution is written, a Sixth Republic is inaugurated, and everything bad about the Fifth Republic is swept away. So your dad may have heard that, but I don't know.
I don't think that's what he was talking about. Oh, the only explanation he gave was he's against capitalism and likes Putin. That's pretty much it.
The Putin stuff is so annoying.
Again, that's the kind of shit that we're used to seeing.
I mean, if you read ultra-left newspapers like the World Socialist website or whatever, they call him a Putin stooge because he criticizes Putin's war crimes.
What?
Yeah.
Is that an accelerationist thing?
I don't
if you
know.
criticize Putin too much, you play into his hands.
I don't know.
LFI helped a lot of Russian socialists get out of the country when the war started. There was a sort of nuanced thing in the sense that Mélenchon has talked about having a normal relationship with Russia for France. He doesn't believe that, and this is before the war in 2022, and even since the war started, the LFI has been a sort of unique party in France and calling for a negotiated settlement, for abstaining on votes to send arms to Ukraine. And, you can think that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'll leave that up to the listener to pass his judgment.
I think our listeners think that's a good thing. If anyone's fucking...
Well, we're a centrist, moderate podcast over here.
Okay. All right. We're happy to reach across the aisle, like I did on Twitter with Danny Finkelstein the other day. Lord Finkelstein.
I don't even know who that guy is. Who the hell is Danny Finkelstein? Lord Danny Finkelstein? Is Britain a real country? Lord Danny Finkelstein.
He's a listener to our podcast, for one thing. One of only two enemies.
He's a conservative peer and columnist.
Famously sat on the board of the Gatestone Institute, which is a far-right.
Having technical issues. 1 second.
No worries. No rush.
No rush, exactly.
No Russian. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, Mélenchon doesn't exactly have a no Russian foreign policy.
Jack's getting worse.
It's
Edit
trippy.
this in over the this is the hard left bit.
Hard left. Hard
Okay,
left.
I sorted it out. I sorted it out.
Okay, let's just.
You are the hard left, Chris. Left, Chris. Left, Chris. Left, Chris.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's fixed now. We're not getting
Okay.
anymore. Cool.
So yeah, I mean, his foreign policy has been like trade with Russia, treating Russia like a normal country. He did support Russia in Syria in like 2014, et cetera, and yet at the same time, he's not like a slavish Putin supporter in any sense, and he has like political allies in Russia on the Russian socialist movement who have been imprisoned in Russia, and when the war started, he helped a bunch of Russian anti-war socialists get out. Hell, if he like they housed them in the embassies, and the MPs used their like immunity to get some out. So it's obviously a ridiculous smear without any nuance.
Mélenchon's stance on Putin is kind of emblematic of like a lot of. I mean, me and Marlon don't want to be too slavishly pro Mélenchon because we're journalists, but the man is really, really, really clever. He's like
no, sorry. If you're a journalist, you should be slavishly pro Starmer. I think that's how it works.
He's a very, very smart man, and he's like incredibly independently minded and doesn't bow to pressure. So he makes his own mind up on things. He's kind of like Corbyn in this way, but if Corbyn was... No, I know, Marlon, you've raised your eyebrow, and I'm going to qualify my comparison of him to Corbyn because I think Mélenchon's better as well.
I'll get into that.
Because Mélenchon fights back.
Go easy on him, Marlon. Go easy on Jezza. Don't
make any promises,
if you sink
Jeff.
the knife in. If you sink the
Make
knife
any
in,
promises.
But he basically...
I think I get what you're saying, though. But...
Yeah, he will stake out an independent position no matter how much pressure is on him to not have that particular position.
Yeah.
And he will stick to it, and he will fight back when accused of whatever he gets accused of. And he sort of almost never breaks. I mean, I don't think he ever breaks, frankly. There was a moment during the election campaign where the anti-Mélenchon hatred had reached fever pitch, and he was on TV being interviewed by this woman, and he was like almost in tears, and he was like, "Thank you for asking me hard questions without accusing me of like racism and just being firm with me without attacking my personal character, because honestly it's getting a bit much." And that was a very like human moment, but that's the only time I've ever seen him anything other than in like full combat mode.
Yeah, he wrote something great, and I am going to draw some differences with Corbyn. I'm sorry, but I think it's actually instructive. I've met Corbyn. I think he's a nice guy, but I don't think he, and I'm talking politically now, I'm no longer centrist, no longer pragmatist. I think Corbyn failed when the British left really needed him to succeed. He didn't take the moment that he had and use it correctly in 2019 after he lost. And Jean-Luc Mélenchon wrote analysis on his blog of Corbyn on the 13th of December 2019, right after the election. And it was really sharp. And I think it sort of laid out what has happened over the next half a decade. He says, "I admit that I'm not surprised," he wrote, "I admit that I'm not surprised by the terrible electoral setback by the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn. It has to serve as a lesson. The first lesson, avant-gardism from those who think right brings us nowhere." That just leads us to what happened to like something like Suspiros, announcing that he wanted a new referendum on Brexit was just inviting those who wanted Brexit to happen to vote for those who would implement it, especially since Corbyn made it clear that in the case of a vote, he wouldn't get involved. "You can't do anything worse," said Mélenchon. "What good do leaders serve if they aren't committed to the future of their country? The working class strongholds in the north, which voted for the Labour Party, have switched to the conservative vote because this guaranteed them Brexit. It was always going to happen." Second lesson, why did they make such a big mistake? It's the result of the internal games within Labour. Corbyn should have completely overhauled the system instead of trying to compromise with them. Or he should have quit. And I think this is like gets into why Mélenchon is so important now, and I think what Corbyn should have done. The old bureaucratic apparatus of the Labour Party only produces internal games and nothing more than that. To build one's political reasoning based on the demands of the internal balance just makes it sure that you're going to lose the balance will be wrong. The problems and the solutions lie in the popular masses, their will and their needs. This is where Corbyn should have taken his instructions from. But he wanted to please the important people in vain. And this goes on and on. And to sort of to that point of anti-Semitism that we mentioned, and why, even though there is this fever pitch against him, he's managed to survive as a political figure and not bend to it. At the end, he says, I will never give in. I will never genuflect before the arrogant diktats of people like CRIF, which is one of these organizations that was attacking him. No, it's no, it's no. And so I don't want to be too hard on Corbyn, but I always have thought that he should have quit the party after 2019. He was being pushed out, and Mélenchon was a great example of this, because Mélenchon, back in 2008, he quit the Socialist Party. So to get into his background, Mélenchon was a senator in the Socialist Party for like a decade. He fought within the Socialist Party. He tried to win the Socialist Party around to his line. In 2005, there was a referendum on deeper European integration. It was called the Lisbon Treaty. There was this big campaign for or against it. The no's won. The French people voted against this treaty, but Parliament implemented it. By 2008, François Hollande, who became president in 2012, had sort of taken over the Socialist Party. The Socialist Party was definitively going down this line of pro-business, reforming the labor code, etc. And Mélenchon did something which I think should have been an example to Corbyn, and is the reason we're talking about him now. He left the Socialist Party. He built, it was called the Parti de Gauche, the left party, and that eventually became the France Insoumise in 2017. He built another party. I think it was in the 2007 election. There were like 4 Trotskyist candidates, Olivier Besançon, but they got like between them over 15% of the vote. One got 5, they got this, the other got that. Mélenchon ran in 2012 for the first time for president, and he got 12% of the vote, sort of assembling all those forces around him. In 2017, he got 19% of the vote. In 2022, he got 22% of the vote. And now you have the new Popular Front. If he had tried staying in the Socialist Party, never would have happened any of this. We wouldn't be talking about him today. He had the backbone, the will to power, even you might say.
Yeah, I just want to come in there as well, because the reason that France has this tripartite structure currently, I mean, and it's a structure that is making the country ungovernable, but the reason that the left even exists in France in this tripartite structure, where you have the bourgeois bloc around Macron, you have the far right bloc around Le Pen, the reason that there's 3 of them is because of Mélenchon corralling, organizing a left bloc, and then activating abstentionist voters to change the balance of power within the French political system. His leadership is what has produced this situation. And I mean, you won't hear this in most media, even in France. Well, more in France, but you would never hear this over here. But like the reason that
the French legislative elections podcast for 2024.
Yeah.
What? Not a new European? You're kidding me?
No. Without his leadership, the left would be dead. The French left would probably look like the Italian left, or we could discuss the British left.
Look, we're not going to argue that the British left is somewhat diminished on where it was a few years ago. I think we can all agree on that. What else do I agree with that you said? Definitely that Jeremy Corbyn shouldn't have given an inch to the people who talked about reversing the Brexit result. That was a fucking disaster. But unfortunately, that was the primary front for the Labour right, not the anti-Semitic thing. The anti-Semitic thing was meant to morally tarnish the Corbyn movement, but the anti-Brexit movement was designed to split its base. And if you look at the people who were involved in it, it was all the old apparatchiks of the Labour right, who had obviously didn't have jobs in frontline politics anymore because Corbyn was in control of the party. There were plenty of right-wingers in the party, but it was becoming an increasingly not fun place for them to work unless they really wanted to just wreck Corbyn full-time. But a lot of them decided to do that out of the party. And then, you got this whole kind of like AstroTurf movement just swimming in money. And they really took people like John McDonnell for a ride. And then I think you got to a point where pretty much like the whole of the Blairites in the party, the soft left, a lot of the left, bar those in like northern seats, basically, that voted extensively for Brexit. And, most people around Corbyn, bar like a couple of his closest advisors, Seamus Milne and Kerry Murphy, they were very, very against the idea of a second referendum. But then I think in early 2019 or late 2018, well, if you're to believe Patrick Maguire and Gabriel Pogren's book, John McDonnell kind of orchestrated a coup against them and got them both sort of demoted in Corbyn's operation. long ramble there, but yeah, I was right about that as well. I always thought that it was a shit idea. So yeah, just wanted to get that in.
Yeah, they're decent reporters, Maguire and Bogman. They're pretty good reporters. I always smile when I hear Patrick Maguire's name because he went to like school with my cousin, and I knew him. I talked with Patrick Maguire a little growing up, so it was funny to like see him.
I've met him as well.
Oh, where?
Yeah.
Well, don't tell. I've got a story about Patrick Maguire.
Why the hell not? Hey,
I think I only met him once. It was at the World Transformed one year. It was 2017, actually, the best year.
We used to like talk on Facebook Messenger when we were like 11 years old about like Queen and shit.
My story about him is that when I was in journalism school, which I wouldn't recommend people go to be honest. It's a waste of money. He gave us a lesson on political reporting, and it was like him hosting and Corbyn talking about how he handled the press as Labour leader. And we were supposedly under like, they were very explicitly like, this is Chatham House rules. You do not repeat anything you hear in this. You do not print anything you hear in this talk. And Corbyn gave some quotable line about how he felt he'd been incredibly badly treated by Starmer, and he felt that the Labour Party was like a bullying organisation. I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something to that effect. Anyway, we had all been told by Maguire at the beginning of the lecture, very specifically, you're not to publish anything about this lecture. Or what does Maguire go and do? Obviously, the second Corbyn says something quotable, he tweets.
Beast mode.
He smelled the story, man, following his journalistic nose.
What do you disagree with me on, Corbyn? Let's hash out. Let's figure out the last half decade of British and French politics. Let's do it.
I don't know. What were the other points? That he I was, when you said he should have resigned, I was like, when he was still leader. When do you think he should have?
After he lost the election in 2019.
Immediately after losing the election. I don't know. It seems inconceivable to me, just because the left was so cowed by losing that election. If Corbyn would have said, right, let's form a new party, Labour's done now, I just really think like fuck all people would have gone along with him at that point.
I think part of the issue is...
Oh, sorry, go on.
No, but a lot of people were still deluding themselves that the left could cling on to the Labour Party at that point.
I mean, I probably was to an extent, but I think like the longer issue, the Corbyn moment and movement, if you like, sort of came almost unexpectedly. The British left was nowhere immediately before that, and had gone quite quickly to being nowhere after that. I think the 2019 election really knocked a lot of people's fight out and knocked the stuffing out of people. And I'm not sure a new party led by, let's say, Corbyn and a couple of other left MPs who joined him, because I don't think the McDonnellites would have joined him.
No, I don't think... You've got to agree, Marlon, McDonnell, way worse than Corbyn.
I do not like John McDonnell.
But I don't think a lot of people would have like immediately joined that new party, and it would then be in the UK small party struggling to get momentum. Nothing actually in common with them, but it would be like the Alba Party in Scotland, where they botched the launch and got some bad publicity or no momentum to start with, and it's never going to get any momentum again in future.
I think this comes back to something that's like, to bring it back to French politics, something that is very, very impressive about Mélenchon and La France Insoumise, and which, in terms of how I think, has like genuinely shaped how I think about politics, and just the importance of leadership. Because the reason that Mélenchon can do a lot of what he does is because he has this charisma and is able to convey his vision and is able to get people to follow him into battle, basically. I spoke to Sabrina Ali Ben Ali recently in Montreuil, where Marlon used to live. She was the candidate that the La France Insoumise ran against one of the candidates they purged. And I asked her, right, so say the New Popular Front wins, as actually did happen. You guys are like aware that immediately, and we can get into this in a second. I'm setting up a segue. Immediately the centre left will start to betray you, right? Like, you guys know this. Like, what are you going to do? Because this front is completely incoherent. The New Popular Front spans a party to Mélenchon's left called the New Anti-Capitalist Party, to Hélène Rousseau, who was an MP in Macron's government. And I was like, so you know that there might be attempts at betrayal, like almost immediately. Like, a load of the people in this front aren't committed to the radical program you've signed them up for. What are you going to do then? She said to me, like, look, I don't know. What I do know, though, is that our movement can change strategy in a matter of hours, and the calls that get made tend to be the right ones. And I think that's probably true. I think Mélenchon has made one or two mistakes across his long career, but it is basically undeniable that he's a success. Obviously, he's not won an election. That is the ultimate test of success, is to win an election. Well, I say that the New Popular Front has just got the largest number of seats, but he's not won a presidential election or whatever and been able to implement his program. We'll see what happens following this most recent election. But he has taken the radical left from complete marginalization. He has hegemonized, it's very fragile, but he has hegemonized a lot of the left over a sort of 10-year battle. And La France Insoumise is the biggest single party on the left in France. And so, to take it back to Corbyn before we can move on to like more French politics, I guess, like maybe the snakery of the centre left, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I'm always up for talking about the centre left being snakes.
Yeah. The reason that he's able to do this is because obviously you can't do this on your own, is that he is able to inspire. He has a sort of clarity of thought and a clarity of vision and an ability to inspire people to follow him in that vision and help develop that vision with him. Me and Marlon had a guest on earlier for the podcast that will come out. By the time it's finished recording, it'll be like tomorrow, but it'll be late in the morning, who has been a Mélenchonist for a long, long time. And he was talking about, this guy's a party militant, but like they have this just incredibly developed analysis because they've spent so much time thinking about all of this stuff, and they are willing to act really quickly. And they are also, they just follow, Casson was talking about the debt that he owed intellectually and politically to Mélenchon in particular, not to make it too much about the cult of personality. That's bad, and Kath did talk about this as well. But like, what actual leadership can do is quite. You could go a long way with actual leadership. Basically, is I think the lesson that Mélenchon imparts.
The way that Mélenchon has functioned is, there's a good biography of him called Mélenchon the Plebeian, and it talks about how he's always functioned with like 20 or 30 people around him. There's this core group around him, and they produce, you could say, content. You know what I mean? They're constantly producing speeches. They're producing videos with their line on everything. They react incredibly quickly. And this is sort of a legacy of him being a Trotskyist. He was a part of this party called POI, which is the Party of Independent Workers, when he was a lot younger.
When did he join the Socialist Party?
Pardon me? I didn't hear.
When did he join the Socialist Party?
I think in the 90s. I couldn't give you the exact answer for that. There used to be a theory that went around that he infiltrated the Socialist Party from the
it was earlier because it was earlier because he was
80s, right?
He was a Mitterrandist, yeah.
Oh yeah, the 80s.
Okay. So was that the left-wing wave of Mitterrandism? It's first wave.
Yeah, essentially. He was very inspired by Mitterrand and close to Mitterrand. He was a junior minister in his government, and he loved Mitterrand. He had a soft spot for Mitterrand personally. But this militantism, yeah, he always reacts the fastest. You'll notice after the first round of the presidential election, he was the first guy on television. He was the first guy to make a speech from any party. After the second round of the election, he was the first guy to make a speech and react to it. And they do this. They're fast. They're so nimble and they're so quick. And yeah, I think Olly's point about leadership is well taken. And maybe you're right, Geraint. If Corbyn had formed a party, there might not have been the same dynamic, because I don't think, unfortunately, Corbyn is the same type of political leader.
And also, he's historically more of a party man. Like Corbyn was in the he's like 73 now or something. He joined the Labour Party at the age of 16. And he's never not been in the Labour Party as an active politician or even activist up until, although he was always probably the most independent Labour MP in terms of his involvement in extra parliamentary movements. He's always been kind of wedded to the party up until they kicked him out a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for him to both adapt to the idea that the Labour Party is not the vehicle for bringing to the left and achieving left goals. Yeah, he's adapting to it now, but it's two difficult things to both adapt to that after an entire lifetime and also be as effective with a completely different strategy to the one that you've been building up to for 50 years. He'd spent his whole life working towards essentially a left takeover of the Labour Party again, having come close to Ben, and where now?
I think you can say this is naivete on his part, but I don't think he anticipated quite how badly it would get under Starmer, which is like, you can say, well, these people, they were so violently, viciously opposed to you that you should have really seen what was coming. But he'd been an MP under Blair, he'd been an MP under Kinnock. He'd survived all of this before. I mean, what can I say? Like, I don't think that he was right about any of this stuff. I think that he should have seen that the Labour Party made the Labour Party completely inhospitable for a future socialist resurgence. But it had happened in 2015 after the party had been solidly controlled by the right since 1983. So I don't think he saw that coming either at the time.
I'll say this, Mélenchon inspires me. Like, it's all sort of a pessimistic conversation we're having now, but his example, I think, is genuinely inspiring, right? Because I think it says that we can be defeated in our parties and then come back. Mélenchon went out into the wilderness for 10 years, and he came back, he'd taken over the left. Hollande, the former president of the country, who had been also the president of the party and Mélenchon's chief rival in the party, it was their conflict that drove Mélenchon out of the party. Mélenchon ran as a candidate for the New Popular Front, which honestly is a creation of Mélenchon, which would not exist without Mélenchon.
Hollande ran as a candidate, not Mélenchon.
Pardon me. Yeah.
Did Mélenchon as well? Was that technically a correct statement?
No, it was not technically. It was correct in no way. But yeah, so like when I talk about it, it's all like kind of like can be demoralizing and pessimistic, but I talk about it and sort of maintain a hard line on it because I think the election was inspiring. Mélenchon is inspiring. Every presidential campaign for Mélenchon is inspiring. And I think what Mélenchon does, he doesn't accept political reality. We talk about these things like, well, Corbyn wouldn't have been able to, the political landscape wasn't like this. Mélenchon changed the political landscape. You can do things in politics, and it requires you to do them.
Yeah, he does have an absolutely iron will. And that's how these formations keep appearing, whether it's NUPS, whether it's the New Popular Front. The La France Insoumise strategy does have limits. I would encourage people to listen to our episode with David Broder, the European editor of Jacobin, because we kind of got into some of the limitations of the strategy. But what it has succeeded in is it's pulled the rest of the left along with La France Insoumise, and they've been trying to break out from the prison that Mélenchon's built for them. Not quite a sealed tomb, unfortunately. But Mélenchon has pulled the rest of the left along. And so, in terms of the snakery that I was talking about,
let's get into it.
Interesting revelations recently. So, the alliance of the New Popular Front includes people that are like actively opposed to Mélenchon's politics, really, which includes like Raphael Glucksmann, François Hollande, all of these people. But also, it also includes people that are quite close to Mélenchon's politics who, for like various institutional reasons, have ended up potentially playing betrayer. So Marlon's from Lille. Recently, it was leaked that Fabien Roussel, the leader of the French Communist Party, who lost his seat in the last election, I think partly because his line is really stupid. It's this like, he's like got good, fairly left-wing views on a lot of things, but he's also on this like very weird identitarian line about the white working class and how you need to like win them over with beer and sandwiches, and vegan wokists are trying to cancel barbecues.
Oh no.
Anyway, that's a diversion. He was recorded on a train from Lille to Paris talking to Gérald Darmanin, Macron's incredibly right-wing interior minister. And the clips aren't entirely clear what's going on, but from what the clips that have been leaked suggest, they are negotiating the possibility of an alliance of the centre-left with the Macronists following the election that will exclude La France Insoumise. And so, although La France Insoumise remains the biggest bloc in the French left, there are all of these elements that are currently working, like maybe thinking about betraying. That might not happen because the politics is evolving so fast. And I do think some people know that an alliance with Macron is like death for them. It would be a kiss of death. But people are being tempted into these alliances because they want to be free of a Mélenchon-led left. And we've also heard of Marlon. What was the anecdote about Marine Tondelier with Macron?
Yeah, they were texting.
Marine Tondelier is the leader of the French Greens.
Marine Tondelier texted after the first round, and she said to Macron, like, you know what your duty is, to block the far right. And Macron texted back, and she said, I'll rise to your expectations. You're very important in the fight against the far right. Flattering her, I think, because if you know, and this is a whole other topic, which I don't think we can get into it, but you can read an article I wrote, an interview with Mark Endewald and Jackman that came out recently to learn more about this. But Macron, I do not think, is generally committed to fighting the far right. So Tandelaye is sort of being courted, I think, by parts of Macronism as a compatible figure to ally with.
Well, Marlon, you've said before that Macron is not a centrist, and that's the key mistake that people are making about him. So, what is Macron? That's my question.
Macron has this ethos of a conservative. If you read people like Mark Endewald's reporting, there's another guy, an ex-Macron advisor who used to lead the right for Macron in the 2017 campaign, who I've talked to, this guy, Jean Bernard. My goodness, I forget his last name off the top of my head. Sorry, Jean Bernard. And he later became illusioned with Macron because he said, I mean, this guy was like sort of a soft right type of guy. He always said he was on the left of the center right. He realized that Macron was much more conservative than he thought. That, you know, Macron was actually very close to Sarkozy, Nicolas Sarkozy, the president of France between 2007 to 2012, who made a ministry of national identity, who was one of the first guys in government, I guess, not the first, but like the sort of the 20th century modern manifestation of this move against, you know, demonizing Arabs and Muslims, etc. He was supported by all these figures in Sarkozy's network to talk specifically about some things that Macron believes. Mark Endewald has reported this, and Eric Zemmour, who is like the most far-right figure in France. I wrote a book about him. This is not the book, but you can check it out. It's Zemmour and Gaullism, published by Ed Books. He wrote in one of his books that he had talked with Macron about this on the phone. Zemmour used to be a Figaro journalist. Talks to a lot of people in the world of politics. And what Endewald reported is that Macron talks about the Great Replacement in his private meetings. He talks about the Great Replacement as something which should be avoided. He's not just like using the word and saying like, oh, the right is talking about the Great Replacement. Macron thinks that France should remain a Christian country, and the Great Replacement is something which needs to be avoided. This is what Endewald has reported. What Zemmour says in his book is that Zemmour told Macron, these people, these Arabs and Africans in the country, they're former colonial subjects who now hate France and want to destroy it, and that's why they're here, and we can't let them in here anymore, which is sort of Zemmour's line. And Zemmour says that Macron says, well, you know, you're right, I agree with you, I just can't say it in public or there'll be a civil war. And then you merge that all with his policies on his social reforms, you know, raising the retirement age, his budget cuts, which are going to come at the expense of RSA, which is like the unemployment insurance, essentially. Macron is a conservative. And in the way he's not a centrist, there's this idea that centrism seeks consensus in the best form of centrism. Like, if we think for a moment,
like your podcast.
Exactly.
Like your centrist podcast, exactly.
Exactly. Like, if we take centrism at face value, it's about building consensus between forces in society, and it often through parliament even. Macron has never sought consensus. He doesn't govern by consensus. He governs by diktat. He has this authoritarian streak in his personality. You see it from the way he's passed a lot of his reforms, using a provision of the Constitution called 49.3, which just refers to a part of the Constitution, overruling Parliament, essentially, passing laws by diktat. His ministries are not independent. Nobody in the ministry runs their own independent policy. Everything comes from Macron. They essentially wait for his orders and then govern like this.
He's appointed and then dispatched so many prime ministers, because if anyone steps out of line, gone.
Macron is a conservative, and Macron is an authoritarian conservative. Mark Endewald, in that interview I did with Jacobin, which I urge people to really check out because we go really deep into this.
It's very good.
Thanks, Olly. They called him a neo-Bonapartist.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I was going to talk about this. I used that phrase. I probably read your interview and then used it, but I've got some writing that I've not had published anywhere, which is about Bonapartism and Macron, because there's this very influential book in French politics. It's by this guy René Raymond, and it's called The Right in France from 1789 to Our Time. It basically posits the idea that there are three rights in French politics. There is the restorationist right, who never wanted the revolution to begin with and who want to overturn it, and that manifests itself in ultranationalism of the kind of Zemmour and Le Pen. There is the Orleanist right, who are the monarchists of before, who've accommodated themselves to the new regime and essentially become bourgeois liberals. And there is the Bonapartist right, which is this right that is not fascist, but governs via authoritarianism and the kind of charisma of the leader, which is what Macron attempts to do. There's this guy, Charles de Villeneuve. He's a very, very good political theorist. He's a little bit like Spiked adjacent, but he's like the best of those people easily. And he's independent-minded enough to not come out with Freudianisms. He has this idea of Macron as being part of a fourth right in French politics, which is to say that like you can't do Bonapartism under neoliberalism. It's very hard to do that exact kind of authoritarian rule, but you can do it if you like combine it, because originally part of Bonapartism was this idea that you combine some of the interests of the working class with some of the interests of the middle class with some of the interests of the elite, and then you govern yourself. It's not fascism, but it is a form of authoritarian right-wing government. What de Villeneuve says is that you can't include working class interests under neoliberalism. So Macron is essentially like a form of Bonapartism without even the single positive bit of some working class interests being addressed, basically.
I love that story. It might have been from that article that was about Macron being asked by a journalist who his closest confidant was, and he couldn't think of anyone. And the journalist was like, "What about your wife?" And his aides were like, yeah, say your wife, that's a great idea. And Macron was just like, myself. What a guy.
What I love about that anecdote is that he frames it like Macron didn't understand the question at first when he asked him who you go to for advice.
Yeah, that is Jupiterian, right?
Yeah, not to coup your podcast and become the host, but speaking of advisors of Macron, this was like a very interesting bit of news that came out either this morning or yesterday. One of his advisors has been hosting like secret midnight meetings with key figures in Macron world and Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella. And part of what was discussed was this idea of the faux duel. This is what the left calls macro-Le Penism, the idea that there is like a duality between Macron and Le Pen and they kind of need each other in order to block out the left. And so what this guy, Edouard Philippe, who was one of Macron's prime ministers and is like a kind of key figure in Macron land, was saying was that we don't want to make a moral critique of the far right. Moral critique is like not what we're about. We want to stage a duel of project against project. We want them to be legitimate in the French Republic so that we can either beat them politically or we can lose to them politically, but we are not going to render them like morally illegitimate, which is particularly telling given that this guy Philippe and a lot of other Macronists have gone very much out of their way over the last few years to make an incredibly toxic and stupid moral critique of the left. So it is this like thing where like Macronism's enemy really is like a strong left. It's not the far right, whatever Emily Maitlis tries to tell you.
Or Peston, I think we could. Do you guys want to? Oh, sorry, Marlon, did you have something to say there?
Just one sentence. Macron's goal is to crush the left. That's his politics.
I don't like this guy. He sounds.
The more I hear about him, the less I like him.
Exactly. It reminds me of my least favorite person in Great Britain and indeed the world, now situated comfortably in the halls of power.
I apologize for where I wrote this, but I have a Guardian piece about why I think he's, and there's more to it than this, but you're only allowed to write like 1,100 words or whatever. That if people are interested in, not to plug my own stuff, but to plug my own stuff, it's a piece comparing Starmer to Macron and why I think they are very similar and why I think we have entered into our 2017 moment, our like 2017 France moment. I think they're very similar figures.
Not the good 2017 moment.
No, the bad 2017 across the channel.
It means something different in these shores. Well, it was a bad moment. 2017 over here was a bad moment for people like Starmer. They would have much rather been doing their thing in France at the time. So in terms of somebody from that sort of political tradition, I was wondering if we could have a little look at this thing Robert Peston wrote on his verified Twitter account. Shortly after the election.
The extremely long tweet.
Yeah, got it up right now, so I'll post it in that group chat that we're all in on Twitter.
Thank you.
Can you all get that up if you want to read along? I'll read it anyway. So.
Right, yeah. So this is obviously one that was just before the election. This was July the 1st, so while the campaign was still ongoing. So this is his predictions, essentially. Well, his reaction. Yeah, this is July 1st.
Hang on, is that the one I was looking for, or was I looking for a different? Sorry, I feel like he wrote one after the election. That
I feel like he did, but I'm wondering if maybe we were all just dunking on him getting it incredibly wrong. Like a few days later, when it went from just a bad take to like an objectively wrong take. I don't know. I'm just trying to look now.
No problem. We'll double check this and you're right there. If not, I'm sure you guys may still find something to disagree with. Or
I already have. So.
Robert Peston's initials are RP, I've just realised. Fucking plagiarist. That's what they really stand for. Risible plagiarist, in my opinion.
Come on the pod, Robert.
Yeah, you guys happy to be on the Roleplay podcast?
I love being on the Roleplay podcast. A roleplay intersectional podcast.
That's that in the chat on here as well. If you haven't probably DMs,
appreciate it. I just got it.
I think that's again. If he did do one after the result, he's deleted it. But I mean, we can tell from this. It gives you a good idea of his grasp on European politics. Really, he struggles enough with British politics, which is his job.
Okay, yeah, all right. No, I see why I thought you guys would hate this. So let's proceed.
Because it's got Robert Peston at the top of it, and it's him that's written it, I think.
Yeah. At Peston. One of the iron laws of politics is that disaffection breeds extremism. There was proof of that in this weekend's French parliamentary elections, where, on a relatively high turnout, which is the last fucking thing British centrists want, by the way,
highest turnout in decades, not relatively high.
That's telling, isn't it?
The dangers of an engaged electorate, yeah.
The vast majority of voters backed the hard right Rassemblement National. One of you guys say
Rassemblement National.
Got it. And the far left bloc, the Nouveau Front Populaire. There, I think I broadly got that one. Again, hard right and far left. They don't get far.
That's completely incorrect, right? Like the RN, it's accurate to call them a far right party. Like fucking a bunch of their candidates during this election were pictured in a White Pride Worldwide t-shirt, a literal SS officer's hat. There was the hostage taker who didn't take hostages. Not that makes them far right, but that one was funny. Someone was in some kind of weird hostage situation 30 years ago and was asked about it, was like, I don't talk about that anymore.
No, she actually said, I don't want to talk about it until the election's over.
But also, dozens of them have contributed to these like neo-Nazi, neo-fascist magazines. The genealogy of the party is from Jean-Marie Le Pen and Pierre Bousquet, who was literally in the SS. This nonsense that they're hard right. Like, I guarantee that this man probably describes like the ERG as the Tory hard right. And I don't want to sanitize the ERG, but they are not the same thing.
And also, the Nouveau Front Populaire are like a left of centre coalition. It's not all like Mélenchon and his supporters.
Yeah, I mean, far left would be wrong there as well. It would be populist.
Yeah.
Left, would be accurate. But yeah, it's like, this has got fucking Hollande in. And it's literally got a Macron minister in it, which was controversial, but it does. So,
especially since Starmer took over, it's much more common to refer to the Corbyn wing of the left in this country as the far left. And I really don't think it's fair for like Mélenchon's politics or Corbyn's politics, because like them or not, these both command a pretty significant. I mean, I guess that disqualifies the far right in France from being called far right as well. But you know what I mean? I think this is a fairly mainstream politics that they represent.
Yeah, for sure.
Not in a bad way.
Yeah.
Shall we continue? Macron's centre was squeezed till the pips squeaked to deploy a saw from an earlier British era. A saying, maybe?
A saw is like a saying, that is, but it's just
okay.
It's so stilted. This guy, isn't his job to write?
So is it just archaic language, aka that's literally saying a saw is a saw from an earlier British era?
Yeah, like the old saw, the old saying.
Right.
This is a European earthquake.
Orwell needs to get on the politics in the English language and use things that people understand.
Yeah, speak some fucking English, Peston. This is a European earthquake. The idea that Marine Le Pen's party, with its racist and anti-EU roots...
Oh, God forbid.
Two equivalent things.
Those two totally on a level with each other, of course, yeah.
Oh, God forbid.
That blew my mind.
Anti-EU. She's also not.
Also, there was no EU when the party was formed. I don't think so. That wasn't like the reason for the party.
For fuck's sake. But yeah, I reckon like if somebody's just racist, people like Peston are like legitimate concerns. But if they're racist and anti-EU, oh my god!
Or if they're just anti-EU and not racist.
Yeah.
Worse than being racist.
Well, then the beef would be that they weren't racist.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the idea that this racist and anti-EU party could form the next government in France, we won't know whether that will happen till after next weekend's second round of voting. So obviously, we know now it didn't. Was unthinkable for much of the post-war era.
Hang on,
not anymore. Sorry.
Well, I mean,
there been like several other runoffs over the years where they basically had to get together in the second round of voting to make sure the far right don't get in.
Yeah,
I get that the polling this time perhaps made it look like the most imminent, but it seems like British journalists have this conversation every few years, like, oh, what's going on in France? They're turning to the far right, and pretend that the last one didn't happen.
No, literally, yeah. No, that's completely correct, Geraint. Like in 2002, it happened with Jean-Marie Le Pen. The last two presidents.
That's right. I was still at school when the first one happened, like, and I'm old as fuck. Like, my entire life, they've been on the verge of going to the far right, and people like Robert Peston have been like wringing their hands and going, "How did this happen?"
That is funny. I was reading a book on the National Front the other day from 1997, and it was so funny reading the introduction because it was like the same thing. Like they're on the edge of power, they transformed what's going on in French society, et cetera, et cetera.
Which it had each time, to be fair, but it's not like the idea that they could do it is not a new one.
Yeah, but they were already saying it 20 years ago, so it's just always funny to see that. Sorry, Jack.
That's all right. Not anymore, Peston says, and the far right is growing across Europe. So here he brings it across the pond. Here in the UK, Nigel Farage's reform has stated the blooming obvious that it won't be forming the government in the UK after Thursday's poll. But as I said to Lee,
bloke, isn't he?
Yeah, it's just like talking common sense.
He's observant, Robert. Concrete fact. Is that
concrete fact.
Yes.
I am a listener of the show periodically. I don't listen to every episode, but I do tune in every now and then.
You pick up the important bits.
If you've got the catchphrases, you only need to tune into a couple. You know, we say them enough. But as I said to Labour's leader today, on a last tour of constituencies to G up the party's door knockers, the failure of Macron, all five of them that they're just busting into every constituency to campaign for Labour. The failure of Macron's bold and ambitious centrism is a lesson for the UK. Starmer agreed, and he told me that trust in mainstream politics is... Starmer apparently agreed with him that Macron is fucked, but he just called for Biden to stay in the race today, so he's picking and choosing his centrist friends.
I also disagree that Macron's... I disagree with the phrase bold and ambitious centrism. But I also disagree that it's failed. I mean, maybe Marlon has a different take to me, but like they've privatized a lot of what they wanted to privatize. They've raised the retirement age, which is like a long time dream of the French right. They've put in measures to restrict immigration. I don't think that Macron's got everything he wanted, but he's been like quite successful if you think about what it was he wanted to achieve in terms of certain policy positions, and he's stuck to them and got a lot of them through, like in like brutal and undemocratic ways, sure, but like I don't think he's entirely unsuccessful on his own terms, really.
I think that Peston is guilty of very short-termist thinking here. He's just seeing the wheels coming off the Macron project at the moment, and that's his definition of failure.
Yeah,
I'm sure
electorally, sure, but in terms of the reshaping of French society, the austerity measures, the privatizations, the militarization of the police, you know, all of like in terms of actual policy, I feel like Macron's done a relatively good job from his own perspective. Maybe there aren't as many startups as he'd like. That was a big whole thing, but Europe is thinking about its own security on like European terms, and he privatized a bunch of stuff. He's got a lot of what he wanted to get done. Would you agree, Marlon?
Yeah. He was successful. He was elected twice. He got, just what you said. I agree.
Sorry, were you going to say more? No. Okay, cool. well, we've only got 3 paragraphs. Don't worry, you guys. We can all go to bed in a minute, or do whatever to know that you guys are night owls like me. But Starmer agreed. Yeah, he told Peston that trust in mainstream. For some reason, Peston puts that trust in brackets mainstream politics is broken. So, like, what did Starmer actually say? Like, why
Starmer said trust in politics.
Yeah, and main Pesto's editorialized.
Yeah,
he agreed completely with me. He didn't say exactly what I.
So if he and Labour take power at the end of this week, he says his overriding priority is to address the everyday concerns of so many who feel disaffected by politics. So,
Same.
What do you think Peston means by that?
That's deep, you know. That feeling when you're addressing the everyday concerns of someone who feel disaffected by politics.
Well, based on what Tony Blair has said over the last day, I suspect he means, I think everyday concerns might mean be racist. But
Yeah. The bloody wokeness, that's an everyday concern. Yeah. Every day you go out and there's just woke this, woke that.
Because Blair was like, the everyday concerns are like, get tough on it. Voters want you to get tough on immigration and don't do the wokery. He
literally said woke. It's fucking embarrassing.
The
wokeism.
Yeah, they say that in French. Believe it or not, you like read a newspaper article, and they'll be like, "And the influence of wokisme américain."
Le wokisme, yeah, that's amazing. God, we're corrupting every language. But here is what Peston says: there is the challenge.
Speaking of corrupting language, I'm sorry.
So when he says to address the everyday concerns of so many who feel disaffected by politics, is he talking about redistributive economic measures, for example? I'm a disaffected voter. Is it anything that I'm going to like? I'm wondering. If he governs only for party loyalists and activists, especially at a time when all the polls show he may be respected by voters, but certainly not loved or especially trusted, any victory he achieves may be Pyrrhic.
He's not liked already. He's already unpopular. Oh, what is this? His personal approval is bad.
But he's respected, Ollie.
He may be respected by voters. Well, he's certainly not loved or trusted. That's right.
Yeah.
But for a guy with the size of majority he's got, he is very notably unpopular. But no, I think the key thing there is the jibe about warning Starmer not to govern only for party loyalists and activists. And okay, now we follow this stuff, so we know that the Labour Party under Starmer, the membership may be somewhat more right-wing than it was a few years ago. But in terms of the way people like Robert Peston still view it, Labour activists are just fucking annoying lefty windbags just whinging on about nationalisation.
Yeah, he means don't listen to Owen Jones.
Yeah, what he's saying there is if he governs only for party loyalists and activists, he means if he does anything left-wing.
Yeah, so he is doing Tony Blair there, isn't he? Don't do the wokeism. Basically, he's saying, in order to not do what Macron's done, you must do what Macron has done.
Yeah. Peston's a fucking genius, man. Oh, yeah,
dialectics. That is dialectics.
He has such a way with words.
Literally, the top reply to this is just, he's not respected either. He says he wants to be prime minister for 2 terms, for 10 years, to achieve the change he says this country needs. But the lesson of France is that if millions of people continue to feel unheard, they'll dump him with the ruthlessness and unsentimentality he showed when dumping his own predecessor. So Peston, when he wrote that, he didn't know that the left were going to get the most seats, so he's absolutely saying that Starmer should appeal more to far-right voters. Yeah.
It's also bollocks, because Macron got 2 terms, famously. He defied 25 years of what they call dégagisme, which is the throwing out of politicians after 1 term. Not because he was popular, because he blackmailed the entire progressive half of the country into having to vote for him, because it was him on the far right. But Macron did get 2 terms. What are you talking about, Robert? Also, this
is twerpy of me to say, but also there's no period at the end of his last sentence.
Yeah, I know. He's like, so fire. So he can't wait to hit send.
These people are paid to write. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a great writer or anything, but give me a break.
To be fair, Peston's more paid to just talk. He just bullshits on TV all day. But he has written books. Well, I didn't read it, actually. I listened to the audio book a while. Like in 2017, I was still hyped up on Corbyn mania. I was still like consuming a lot of political books, and I like listened to the audiobook of this Peston book, and yeah, really shit. He was just complaining that like Labour's 2017 policies weren't redistributive enough because like they were going to abolish tuition fees, and he was like, that's a bung to the middle class. It was just all that like anal, like James Ball, New European type shit. Like they're like, actually, I'm more left wing than Corbyn because I've always favoured a graduate tax. That kind of shit.
What do you think he means by the ruthlessness and unsentimentality he showed when dumping his own predecessor? I mean, it's interesting, this idea that voters could be ruthless and that they should be sentimental. But also, is he saying that it was a bad thing? This man doesn't know anything. He should stick to triggering bank runs.
I guess because I was reading it, I kind of like glazed over that he literally ended the article on a shot at Corbyn. He was just like, yeah, this prick.
Yeah.
And then that's what he was so excited about that he forgot to attach the full stop.
Really, really hoping for like the far right getting in so he could be like, look what Corbyn's done. And, you know, maybe if he's particularly nuanced, look what French Corbyn has done, because that'll be his level of analysis for that.
Yeah.
There are so many articles about French Corbyn right now.
Many of them in the Jewish Chronicle, I'm sure. But yeah, I don't think Peston is saying that the ruthlessness and unsentimentality of how Starmer kicked Corbyn out is bad. You often hear Starmer's supporters describing him as ruthless. My favourite recent example of Starmer ruthlessness was when he just sacked Emily Thornberry from the cabinet when she'd been thinking for like years that she was going to serve in the government. Exactly. Metal, bro.
You don't call the man boring. Do not brief Owen Jones that he is boring. He will have you sent to the Islington Gulag.
Yeah, it's just funny because she did like proper betray Corbyn and everything, despite being like one. She, you know, there's quotes from her from a few years ago, like Jeremy is my closest friend in politics, and it's just like, fuck you, out there campaigning for Prafal Nagan, like a total scab.
And she's one of the most ideologically flexible people in the Labour Party, in that she's sucked up to like the last three permanent leaders quite embarrassingly, and they're all completely incompatible with each other in terms of political platforms and stuff, while also trying to run as leader herself. So really funny to see her get a comeuppance anyway.
Yeah.
I thought Nandy getting culture, media and sport was funny as well, because I mean obviously like
that's funny.
Thangam Debonair got booted, but it was also like, oh really, Lisa, was it like everything, like betraying everything that you've ever claimed to stand for? Was it worth it?
Yeah.
Not that I think DCMS is unimportant. Like, obviously, culture.
No.
They have culture
if anyone
in
ever got the
towns
brief. Yeah, she's going to be like, so someone will be to her like, oh, you're going to try and revive theatre in British towns, and she's just going to go, fuck, I want to be jetting off to America and meeting world leaders. What do I get stuck with this? But that's why these people are so unsuitable for that brief. It's why Tom Watson was so bad at it, because he was incredibly lazy. But like, that's a different thing.
Yeah. Well, guys, I guess before we go, are there any highlights of the UK elections for you? Given you're big supporters of Mélenchon, I imagine you were delighted by Reform getting into Parliament finally, winning some seats.
Yeah, Farage's long march he is British Mélenchon.
He kind of is in how he just doesn't go away. He just comes back and tries again, which not politically at all. I would not write my new article for the Jewish Chronicle, why Mélenchon is actually French Farage, not French Corbyn.
That's a New Statesman article, I feel.
If
you're right.
The Jewish Chronicle, they might be seen as endorsing Farage.
Oh, we should support him.
Yeah.
UK election highlights. Jonathan Ashworth, probably.
Oh, yeah. You've seen him kicking off today, I'm sure, on doing the rounds of all the news and just being like, I'm not saying it was the Muslims, but it was the Muslims, and basically paraphrasing for any lawyers listening, but it's clear what he's dog whistling. We all knew he was getting that excuse in place when that video came out. Was it maybe a week before the election, where he was like walking around campaigning and a couple of constituents were arguing with him, but they were arguing with him in a reasoned way. They were just trying to question him.
Were they arguing Muslim?
there was no shouting, and he was just like, "You are intimidating me. You are intimidating me. This is not the way to do democracy." And he was walking around with like his arms outstretched and like flexing his arms around him to try and prove that they were invading his personal space. They weren't. They were nowhere near his arms. So it just looked like a very weird man doing like a T-pose, like a glitched computer game.
That's something that I think about quite a lot, actually, is the way French politicians are bad in a lot of ways. And they do cry bullying a bit, but like they are willing to put up with so much more than British politicians. Even the bad French politicians don't default to crying immediately.
Is there still a bit more of a sense of, okay, I'll argue and have a discussion with the voters that disagree with me?
Yeah, and it's like, I think people are like, I don't want to look like a pussy, so there
are a lot of videos of Mélenchon just shouting at people in the street. I remember there was like one, he ran against Marine Le Pen in her district once to sort of like beat the far right there. He didn't win, but he wanted to like drive the score down. And there's some guy who was like telling about immigration in the street, and Mélenchon just starts calling him a racist and like a stupid racist. And like, you don't think these things through.
Macron does it as well in a way that is like worse. But French politicians are just willing to stare down a voter and be like, "No, you're wrong," in a way that just is not the case in Britain.
The trend in Britain, particularly in the last few years, but it's constantly accelerating, just seems to be to try and keep the whole political process completely hermetically sealed. You watch the news for a couple of weeks before an election, you go in, you put a cross in the box you like the best, and that's it. That's your full engagement. Like we joke about, if you don't like how the world's going, you just tick a box every 5 years, but they're consistently trying to characterize like talking to politicians in a way that isn't just slavish agreement with them as inherently abusive. It's so dangerous. But every major newspaper and the two main political parties certainly seem absolutely dead set on it.
Like we've talked about like charisma, and obviously like charisma can be used for like bad ends and everything. But I think that's like, this has just occurred to me based on what you were saying, Geraint. Like maybe this is why British politics is so absolutely fucking devoid of charisma among anyone, because they don't ever talk to people. They don't allow themselves to talk to people because I don't know, because they all, I don't know if they actually think they're all going to get Joe Coxed or whatever, but they either suspect they're going to get, like, I don't know, it's very strange. They don't ever fucking talk to people, do they?
No.
I don't know.
I was in Bishop Auckland, I think, in 2019, campaigning for Corbyn. I haven't really paid attention to British politics since 2019, so I don't have any like favorite memories from this.
It's been
cycle.
shit, mate. You haven't missed
you've missed nothing.
But I remember the candidate was Stuart Brady. I don't know if he's still kicking around British politics. Maybe he's a name to look up. He was the Labour candidate, and he was out there campaigning on like, we need a second referendum, which was just absurd. You know, Bishop Auckland's up near Durham and stuff. And like voters were not like, did not like it. And I remember this couple walked by, they were walking their dogs, and Brady, like a golden retriever, went up to them and was like, "Hey, I want to have you voted yet? Blah, blah, blah. Have you decided who you're going to vote yet for?" And they were like, "Oh, we couldn't vote for Labour." And he's like, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, Brexit." And these people are very laconic and taciturn, just one-word answers. And we're walking away, and Stuart Brady kept like trying to engage them. Like, "Oh, but what do you mean Brexit? What do you mean Brexit?" And he's like, "Well," they're like, "Well, the referendum, we voted." It's like, "Well, so you can never change your mind? You can never vote again? Has Brexit been a good success for us?" And he's saying this as they're walking away until it turns into him like shouting at them down the street angrily at this point. Like, "Well, it's been terrible. Don't you know that? We should."
And was he a second referendum fan himself? Because you had a lot of MPs who were like, they were extremely angry at Corbyn after they lost in 2019, but they were not angry at him about the referendum policy. In fact, they had been just as angrily demanding that he adopt the second referendum policy for a long time before that. And it seems like there's certain Labour candidates in northern seats who lost their seats in 2019 who I'm like, did they deliberately throw that? But it sounds like Stuart Brady actually fucking believed in it.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I just realized I have to correct myself. I was in two places. He was somewhere outside of Leeds, Stuart Brady. But it was still an area that had voted Brexit or something like that. There were like two sections of the constituency. There was the university, and so I think he was like trying to appeal to those university voters. But then the other part of the constituency, where was it? I wish I could remember off the top of my head.
So he,
Because I don't know this guy actually.
he stood in the election just gone in Reigate, where he added some votes, but he narrowly lost again. So that's still a Conservative seat.
Interesting.
No wonder I don't know this guy.
Do you think the second referendum was still part of his campaign?
It's like the last Japanese soldier. Marlon, was Stuart Brady the one who you wrote said, "Oh, John McDonnell's actually a lot more moderate than people give him credit for"?
That's him, yeah.
I mean, I'm not giving him any credit for that. Yeah. He's lost credit with me for that. Right. Should we wrap it up, guys?
I think so. That's about 2 hours now. Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Get plenty out of that. Yeah.
It's all recorded okay? But we'll get it out soon. Don't worry. I won't keep it in the can for long.
Wait, what?
Jack, you need to give yourself like a week or two off after dealing with these episodes because you've been podcasting or editing podcasts like every day for weeks.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, should I thank you guys for coming on the show? That would be a nice way to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again to our guests, Marlon Ettinger and Olly Haynes from the FLAP podcast, French Legislative Assembly podcast, which is available on all good streaming services.
FLAP 24.
FLAP 24. I so nearly got it.
Well, thanks for having us on the roleplay podcast.
Thank you for coming and doing some hot roleplay with us, guys. It's been scintillating. Scintillate, whatever, however you say that word.
Scintillating. Well, that works too.
You've got to leave that in the end, Jack. I insist on that one.
End on that. Yeah, cut on that. Hard cut.
Yeah. Okay. Peace and love. Viva Mélenchon. I like him too. I just wanted to say that. I think
yeah, we've concluded that Mélenchon's good.